네, 반갑습니다. 오세영이라고 합니다. 제가 나온 이유는 이제 저희 강연을 이제 하시게 되지만 사실 이 강연이 저희가 이제 담론이라고 할까요? 혹은 장애예술에 대해 관련된 담론을 국내에 아직 이제 뭐랄까 본격적으로 시작이 안 됐기 때문에 그것을 좀 도입하고 연계해서 조금 생산적인 논의장으로 끌고 가고자 포럼을 처음에 준비하려고 했는데 저희가 이제 모르는 낯선 용어들도 굉장히 많고 처음 접하는 개념들이 굉장히 많으실 거라고 생각합니다. 그래서 강연 중심으로 하고 그것들을 이제 국내에 있는 학자들과 함께 논의의 장으로 이제 시작하는 의미에서 강연과 그 이후에 이루어지는 토론으로 이렇게 프로그램을 세팅을 했습니다. 그래서 오늘 첫 번째 날인데요. 미국에서 접속해 주셔서 아주 오랫동안 활동해 오신 분이 이제 장애예술, 장애미학 관련된 소개를 해주실 예정입니다. 저는 오늘 모더레이터를 맡아주신 교수님만 소개해드리고 내려가도록 하겠습니다. 저는 지금 현재 한 키가 175 정도 되고요. 50대 남성입니다. 그리고 이제 까만 자켓을 입고 있고 회색 바지하고 흰 운동화를 신고 있습니다. 머리는 이게 짧은 것도 아니고 긴 것도 아니고 그냥 노멀합니다. 그리고 약간 살집이 있는 그런 체형을 가졌습니다. 오늘 모더레이터를 맡아주실 김남수 교수님은요, 서울대학교 미학과를 졸업하셨고 독일 베를린 훔볼트 대학에서 문화학으로 박사학위를 받으셨습니다. 현재 이화여자 대학교 조용예술대학 예술학 전공 교수로 계시고, 죄송합니다, 왜 이러지? 재직 중이면서 주로 문화 이론과 매체 이론을 강의하고 계십니다. 저서가 있는데요. 2015년에 본다는 것이라는 책을 쓰셨고 2016년에 광기, 예술, 글쓰기라는 책을 쓰셨습니다. 번역서로는 다니엘 파울 슈레버의 한 신경병자의 회상록이라는 책을 번역하셨고 발터 베냐민 책을 많이 번역하셨습니다. 모스코바 일기를 2015년에 번역하셨고 칼 슈미트라는 법학 철학자죠. 땅과 바다라는 책을 번역하셨습니다. 논문으로 과거를 어떻게 할 것인가 또는 어떻게 대할 것인가 발터 베냐민의 회억 개념이라는 제목으로 논문 쓰셨고요. 아카이브 미술에서 과거의 이미지 베냐민의 장애와 파편 조각 개념을 중심으로 글을 쓰셨습니다. 네, 김남수 교수님을 앞으로 모시겠습니다. 큰 박수로 맞이해 주세요.
네, 안녕하세요. 오늘 모두 예술주간 첫 번째 강연 모더레이터를 맡게 된 김남씨입니다. 네, 먼저 강연자 소개에 앞서서 제 모습을 한번 소개해 드리겠습니다. 아시아계 남성이고요. 검은 머리이고 청바지와 회색 상의를 입고 있습니다. 수염이나 피어싱이나 반지 등은 없습니다. 네, 오늘 우리 모두 예술주간의 첫 번째 강연을 맡아주실 아만다 카시아 교수님을 잠깐 소개해드리고 강연을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 아만다 카시아 교수님은 현재 휴스턴 대학 캐서린 맥거번 예술대학 교수님이시고 큐레이터, 작가, 미술사학자로 다양한 분야에서 활동을 하고 계십니다. 캘리포니아 대학 샌디에고에서 미술사 이론 위평 박사학위를 취득하셨고요. 2022년에 접근성 큐레이팅, 장애예술의 창의적 조화라고 하는 책을 편집하셨습니다. 현재까지 약 50번 이상의 예술 전시 기획을 하셨는데요. 특히 젠더, 인종, 섹슈얼리티, 장애예술을 중심으로 전시를 기획을 해주셨습니다. 오늘 말씀드릴 주제는 접근의 주체, 동시대 장애예술과 제도적 비평이라고 하는 주제로 강연을 해주실 텐데 제가 강연 내용을 잠시 둘러봤었는데 상당히 흥미로운 내용들이 많이 있습니다. 무엇보다 지금까지는 저희가 접근성을 고민을 할 때 기존에 있었던 미술관이나 미술 작품에 어떻게 접근성을 높일 것인가 라고 하는 차원에서만 고민을 했었다면 이제 아만다 카시아 교수님께서는 작품 자체의 제작과 작가들과의 협업 가운데에서 이 접근성과 장애예술의 문제를 고민을 하시는 이런 내용입니다. 그래서 저도 많은 통찰과 아이디어를 얻었는데 여러분들도 그러실 수 있으시기를 바랍니다. 네, 그럼 아만다 카시아 교수님을 불러보겠습니다. 카시아 교수님, 안녕하십니까?
Hello.
네,
Thank you very much for having me today, and I'm very excited and happy to be presenting to you. The title of my talk today is The Agency of Access, Contemporary Disability Art and Institutional Critique. I'm an assistant professor of arts leadership at the University of Houston in Texas. So the title of my talk that you see on the slide here is the title of my forthcoming book. And the book is scheduled to be released in fall of 2024 with Temple University Press. So, I'm an arts leader, I'm a teacher, a curator, and an activist. And this is a screenshot from my website. And I encourage you to visit my website to learn more about my practice. This is the website, myname.com. Please visit so you can learn more about my work and my research, my curating, and my teaching. As I mentioned, I have my first book being released next year, The Agency of Access. And in the book, I'm looking at how 20th century art has been a major influence on contemporary disability art. And I'm trying to show those connections between earlier art movements and contemporary art, and how those earlier art movements were actually also interested in exploring experiments with the senses, which is similar to what the work is of contemporary disability art. And I'm very happy to share that with you today. Last year, I published my first book, which was an edited volume, and that was entitled Disability Art Activism and Creative Accommodation. And in that book, I had over 40 authors from all over the world, including South Korea. And these were all different people who were interested in disability art and how we can make our art museums more accessible. I've also been fortunate to receive a lot of publicity and coverage on my work. This is an article that was released by Art in America in 2020 about how to make art exhibitions and art events more accessible. And this is some of my writing that was published in this book, Interdisciplinary Approaches to Disability, where I provided a manifesto and some guidelines for what kinds of implementations museums can use to make, to instill creative access. And this is another article that was published in 2013, 10 years ago, about how to disable the museum and to encourage curators to become activists in the museum to benefit disabled audiences. When we think of access in the museum, we typically think of these different elements. We think of ramps, we think of braille labels, maybe some sign language interpretation, some tactile tours, some large print labels, and some audio description. All of these elements are very important to thinking about access. There's many guidelines that can be found in different parts of the world. This is a guideline produced by the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, and This can be found for free online that you can download, that they provide accessible exhibition design guidelines. This is another access guidelines developed by a disabled artist named Carolyn Lazard. This can also be downloaded for free. And this is another one, also on accessible curating, which was designed and prepared by Shape Art in London in the United Kingdom. So what does disability arts leadership look like? Arts leaders often think of access as a practical component, which is added on as an afterthought within our arts and cultural institutions, and they treat it as compliance. But how can we be more creative about access so that it permeates our institutions in more dynamic, progressive, and transformative ways? As arts leaders, we need to embrace access aesthetics. Access aesthetics is a leadership style and a new methodological framework where we utilize the tools of access. For example, audio description, captions, tactile objects, sign language, alt text, and more, and we use those as creative tools for engaging disability community. Access aesthetics also incorporates inviting disabled artists to engage in the development of these access points for our audience. Disability art leadership incorporates working with contemporary disabled artists who engage with institutional critique. Institutional critique is an art genre that emerged in the 1960s and gained in popularity throughout the 70s and the 80s. This is an image of an artist named Fred Wilson, who is famous for curating an exhibition in Baltimore called Mining the Museum in 1992 and 1993. In this exhibition, Fred Wilson was invited to rearrange the objects on display in the museum so that the museum visitors could see a very different perspective on the museum's collection from the perspective of Blackness and from the perspective of race. By rearranging the objects in the museum, visitors could also be made aware of how very one-sided the perspective was of the museum, because Fred Wilson was trying to shed more light and more information on the racist legacy of the museum, particularly in regards to its attitude towards slavery. So like Fred Wilson, contemporary disabled artists work to unveil the very limited perspectives of museum culture, which is steeped in patriarchal, racist, and ableist frameworks. Disability arts leadership requires engaging in a process of institutional critique in collaboration with disabled artists using access aesthetics. The image that you see on the screen is a work by an artist named Finnegan Shannon, and the work is called Museum Benches. So what you're looking at is a blue bench, and the words on the bench say, "This exhibition has asked me to stand for too long. Sit if you agree." So the artist is making a comment on how museums often neglect to put in enough seating in the museum for the comfort of its visitors, regardless if they are disabled or not. So this is a direct critique or an institutional critique made by the artist that simultaneously offers a practical solution, but also a political comment and critique. So there are 5 ways that arts managers and curators can demonstrate progressive leadership in the museum towards disabled audiences and artists. And these are the 5 chapters that the topics that I've divided up my new book. The first is translation. The second is sensory aesthetics. The third is touch. The fourth is movement and vision. And the fifth is exhibition design. And the first topic will be translation. Christine Sun Kim is a very well-known American Korean artist who has become very famous around the world. And Christine is has been providing work for the last 10 years that critiques the quality and the experience of caption. Christine is a deaf woman who is very interested in experiences and interpretations of sound. And she often talks about how her experience with captions is very limited. And so she's made available for the museum and gallery world ways that we can improve the caption experience from her own perspective as a deaf person. Oftentimes, when I curate exhibitions, I ask the artist and any other collaborators, such as my students, to work with me and design audio descriptions together so that the audience member who is vision impaired or low vision or blind can experience artworks from multiple perspectives. The user goes into the gallery space, they're able to use their iPhone or their cell phone to engage in the description and use that as a guide as they experience and enjoy the exhibition. Oftentimes, I've also invited artists to describe not just the visual elements of an artwork, but to also describe the sound and to describe how one might participate with the work of art. This image shows an example of a Braille label next to an English label. This label is a description of the smell. This is a work that had a smell element, and it was described. In this label, Christine Sun Kim is taking visitors on a tour in this video through an exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art. And the reason this is so important is because oftentimes museums offer tours of their exhibitions that are only offered once a month or very infrequently. But by showing the tour in sign language of an exhibition on its website, it means that visitors can access sign language interpretation of artwork at all times, all over the world. I decided to also do a similar tour of an exhibition that I curated 10 years ago, and I hired an American Sign Language interpreter to join me and go on a tour of an exhibition that I curated. The exhibition was about translation and about the deaf experience with sound, and so it was very important to me to invite interpretation and sign language interpretation as part of the exhibition. Then the exhibition went on tour, and I was able to have another screening of sign language for my visitors inside it, and it was recorded inside a professional television studio. This is an artwork by an artist named Park MacArthur, and the work is called Carried and Held from 2012. This is an artwork where the artist has a list of people who have moved her body in and out of her wheelchair throughout her life. So this artwork is important because the artist is using the convention of a label as an artwork and turning that gesture around to actually give thanks to people who are part of her care routine. Typically those people are neglected, and so Park wanted to give them a literal platform and a place to give thanks for the work that they do with helping her. And this is another image of the same work, and you can see how long the label is, and it also includes the emojis. This is an image from another exhibition I curated in 2018, Gems and Minerals. And in this one, a sign language interpreter is giving a tour through the Gems and Minerals exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And then as they're giving their tour, they suddenly break out into interpretive dance and show you how translation can be through the body and be expressed in multiple and complex ways. This work is very similar to a piece by Andrea Fraser, this black and white photograph that you see on the right, which is called Museum Highlights, where Andrea Fraser pretended to be a museum guide and take people on a tour through a museum, because she was questioning the idea that the museum is the fountain of all knowledge and testing the idea that perhaps that's not necessarily true. So I think that this work by Dea Basado on the left has a similar quality, where they're conveying expressions that might be outside of conventional knowledge in a museum. And in this work, I had this exhibition that I organized, Script Rescript, for the San Diego University Museum of Art, the School of Art and Design. I asked my students to develop audio descriptions and to participate in that process as well. And here is another example of an artwork that students described. And they tried to describe the artwork in very tactile terms because visitors were encouraged to come by and touch the work. Part 2 is sensory aesthetics. This is an artwork by low vision, non-visual learner Carmen Papalia. Carmen likes to take visitors and guests on what he calls the blind field shuttle, and he does that in different cities all over the world. So he asks people to form a line and close their eyes, and he guides them through a public space as a way for them to experience the world around them through their other senses. Oftentimes we take for granted that vision is at the top of the sensory hierarchy. And so Carmen wanted people to focus instead on their other senses so that they can experience the world around them in a new way and in a different way. As part of Carmen's work, he decided that he wanted to dispense with his white walking cane and instead replace the cane with a high school marching band that developed a series of sounds that gave him cues to how to walk through a public street, whether he needed to go left or right, or cross the street, or go up the stairs, or turn a corner, etc. So it was a very fun and exciting project for him. This is Christine Sun Kim again. This is at the opening reception for an exhibition I curated in 2012 in Pennsylvania. And Christine had decided to use these subwoofers on this platform and create images where the boards were placed on top of the subwoofers with some paint. And as she made noises into a microphone, the sounds would be fed through the subwoofer and would create vibrations, which would then create these marks on the surface of the boards as a visual expression of sound that she was generating as a deaf woman. This is a clip from an artist named Alison O'Daniel. Alison O'Daniel is a hard of hearing filmmaker based in San Francisco. She often makes her films where there's always captions, and the captions are more descriptive and more unconventional than traditional captions because she's interested in showing different lines of communication and more expanded lines of communication. Again, pushing this concept of sensory aesthetics. Part 3 is touch. This is a work of art by Australian artist Bayan Devi. Bayan Devi has low vision, and this is a work that she created in 2021 where blind visitors could come and touch a sculpture in the gallery space. And Bayan is often interested in visitors experiencing work again through their other senses. In 2015, I invited artist Wendy Jacob to create a new work for an exhibition I curated at the University of Toronto. In this work, there's a basketball court that has been set up inside the gallery. And this is a raised platform. You can see the raised platform in this image in the back. Inside that platform is subwoofers and sound equipment. And this is a Canadian wheelchair basketball team. So as they played basketball on this pretend court, at the opening, the sounds that were being emitted from the wheels of their wheelchairs and from the bouncing of the ball were recorded and picked up by the sound equipment under this platform. And people sitting on the platform could feel those vibrations from underneath, which is really exciting. This is the exhibition that I curated last year, and you can see that there were lots of samples of materials from the work that visitors could touch so that they had an understanding of the materials, the fabrics, the textures. The artists decided they didn't want people to touch the actual works of art, but it was really important to me as a curator that visitors could still experience a tactile component to the exhibition. At this exhibition in San Diego, called Sleep Gum Vibrating, I was able to have all of the work in the exhibition to be tactile friendly. And so visitors were able to come in and engage with the work. Sometimes the work made sounds, and sometimes they were able to see different kinds of synesthetic elements with the work. This is a series of gongs, and when you hit the gongs, different sounds would emanate. In this installation, I asked the artists if they would give me a three-dimensional component to the work. They provided these videos that are projected on the screen, on the wall, and I asked them if they could give me material so that we could actually experience that video through the tactile elements. So visitors were able to come and touch those materials as they were watching the video of the materials. So it became a much more tactile friendly and multi-sensory exhibition. The same applies to this project by artist Darren Martin. You can see there's a video of abstract shapes projected on the wall, and Darren then created 3D prints that were left on the wall so that people could come and touch them. So again, a very activist intervention in curating where artwork becomes much more multi-sensory and tactile friendly. Unfortunately, this exhibition that I curated wasn't very easy because lots of visitors came and the work was sometimes damaged. So we went through a stage where we could not touch the work anymore, and that is difficult. So my recommendation is that we must have clear guidelines and be very prepared for audiences when we want to encourage touch for an exhibition. These works were, we were encouraging people to be much more careful and much more gentle as they were touching the work. Other examples of the way that you can bring tactility into an exhibition is through, creating maybe smaller scale models of real works of art. This image up the top here is a black scaffold where ballet dancers would create a dance. And down here, you can see black pipe cleaners that were used to recreate the shape and the form of the scaffold. And this is what we offered to children's groups and teenage groups that came through the museum to interact with the work. We also offered different kinds of tactile paper and pen with embossing that students could engage with. And here is another example of that. So the final section is movement. This is a very famous photograph of an installation by the French artist, conceptual artist, and surrealist artist, Marcel Duchamp. So this one is called His Twine, and it's from 1942. It's from the First Papers of Surrealism exhibition held in New York City. And what the artist tried to do here is inhibit the way that visitors were able to move through an exhibition space. Because in order to see any of the artwork, of course, you had to bend and go on the floor, crouch, and find different ways to go and see all of the artwork. And the artist, of course, did this very intentionally to be able to disrupt a so-called, normative way of moving through an exhibition space so that we could think outside the box and reconsider the way that we move and to challenge our definition of normal movement, as I said. This work is very important because I believe lots of contemporary disabled artists have been inspired by this type of installation. They're able to create similar kinds of challenges for movement for contemporary audiences. This is also a historical work by the Austrian graphic designer and architect and exhibition designer named Herbert Bayer. He was interested in how to extend the field of vision or the line of vision when we're experiencing works of art in a gallery space. So you can see here that this is a big eyeball that is looking in all directions at the way that the work has been displayed and installed in the gallery. So even though this work is still very much relying on the primacy of vision, he nonetheless is seeking to challenge the way that we always look at the work of art that is hung on the wall directly in front of us in a horizontal position, in a vertical position rather. So it's important that the artist is also thinking about outside of the box. This is the work called Bandaged Orchestra by Yoko Ono, who was part of the Fluxus movement from the 1960s. In this work, Yoko Ono went to Carnegie Recital Hall in New York City and bandaged up all of the musicians in the orchestra and wrapped them up completely so they couldn't play music and they couldn't see. And the idea was to think about how do you experience music when we don't have the conventional ways of thinking about voice or instrument. So she was presenting a challenge to experience a concert in this way outside of traditional senses. This is a work by an Italian artist named Gianni Colombo, and in this work, titled Three Diversely Inclined Contiguous Zones from 1965 to 1968, the artist wanted the viewer, the visitor, to come up inside this cube and to try and find a way to balance effectively in the cube. So what the artist was trying to point out that in order to try and balance our bodies, we were not having to just simply rely on our vision, but our entire body in order to get into position. So then he was also pointing out that when we experience a work of art, we shouldn't just simply limit ourselves to seeing the art, that we should be able to experience it through our entire bodies and our entire sensorium. This is one of the most famous works of art of the 20th century by the abstract expressionist artist Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock became famous because he put the vertical painting, the vertical canvas, horizontally on the floor. And I believe that this work is important thinking outside of the box too, because of the way that Pollock challenged our positionality. He looked down at the artwork instead of looking up, and I believe that that was an important precursor, as like all the previous slides we've just seen, in thinking again outside of the frame, which I think helped pave the way for contemporary disability art. This is a famous series of photographs from a protest made by disabled people as part of the Americans for Disabilities Act in Washington, D.C. on the Capitol steps in 1990. At that time, policy was very slow at being passed by the president of the country, George Bush, and so disability activists were fighting for civil rights and to move this particular policy into place to protect the rights of disabled people. And you can see here that disabled protesters got out of their wheelchairs and climbed the steps of the Capitol building to, again, to make a commotion, to gain attention, to become controversial, and to really draw attention to their needs and to their demands. And I believe this horizontal positionality was very radical, it was very performative, and in my mind has a lot of resonance with Paula, who was also drawing our attention to the ground. This is a work of art by Irish artist Colvin Walker, and it's called Trapezoid. What we're looking at here is a series of strings that are suspended from one side of the gallery wall to the other. The measurement of the gap between the lowest line of string and the floor is 4'3", and that is the exact height of the artist himself, who has the most common form of dwarfism, named achondroplasia. So the artist is also being very similar to Marcel Duchamp in that he's making the movement from one side of the room to another for somebody of average height to be more difficult or more challenging, so that one has to bend under the lines to get from one side of the room to the other. And he's doing that in a similar way to Duchamp in order for us as viewers and as audiences to become more self-aware of our bodies and the way that we take movement for granted. Oftentimes for disabled people, moving through a public space, moving through public environment is difficult, it's challenging, because the public environment was not built with disabled people in mind. This is a work also by Colvin Walker that he developed during a residency in France. What you can see here on the ground is a series of stanchions. So these stanchions are what we would often see in museums, and they're placed in front of artworks that have great monetary value. They're meant to ward off people getting too close. They're meant to be almost like stop signs. If you go too close, maybe an alarm will go off or a security guard might say something to you. So Colvin, as a person of short stature, often found that these stanchions really inhibited his experience of viewing a work of art and really inhibited the way that he was able to, move through a gallery as well, especially because he's of shorter stature. So the stanchions would actually come up higher on his body. So because he was feeling so challenged by this, he created an installation of stanchions set up like a maze so that people were forced to go through the maze to get from one side of the room to the other in a similar way that Marcel Duchamp made it difficult and created a maze for people to get from one side of the room to the other. Here are the stanchions that we would normally see in a museum, which are creating a barrier for him. And here is another view of the installation with the stanchions. So now we can see the work side by side with Duchamp and then with Colin Walker in the center. And now we're looking at another work of art by Carmen Papalia on the right. So that work by Carmen Papalia, I'm going to talk about in the next section. This is part 5, exhibition design. So as part of exhibition design, disabled artists have created these displays that again create challenging barriers for people to move through a space. In this work called With Reasonable Accommodation by a Chicago artist named Stephen Lapsifosbon, he has created a collage of different tools and equipment that disabled people would use, but he's decided to turn them into unfunctional objects. So the image that you're looking at on the right, called ramp, is a ramp that goes directly into the wall. So it's quite nonsensical. It's not functioning as a proper ramp. But what the artist is trying to say is that's oftentimes what disabled people have to deal with in public environments and in public space. That there's, interventions that are created for disabled people that are not very helpful. So this is Carmen's work that we saw in just the previous slide. Carmen, if you might remember, is the artist who has low vision and who uses a cane. So Carmen has created this series of mirrors, which are kind of dizzying, and he does that as a way to distort the visual field and make it intentionally confusing for visitors who are coming into the space and are trying to get in and out. You can see a thin line of red string has been wrapped around the mirror, similar to what Duchamp again has done. And the line of string is often a guiding string that the artist uses if he doesn't have his cane to help give him a guide through the space as a way of moving through the space. The irony of the string is that oftentimes it's simply going to get in the way for people who are sighted. And in fact, the string, because of the way that it's being reflected in the mirrors, makes it even more confusing. This is another installation by Carmen Papalia that he's designed, where he's created a makeshift ramp with scaffold. In the center is a large dome, and you can sit underneath the dome and listen to different sounds by different disability activists who have different manifestos. Carmen has designed this exhibition with disabled visitors in mind, so that visitors can use the ramp, they can come and listen, they can use the mirrors that are also in the space, and it's supposed to be an environment that is more friendly to disabled visitors. And there is a close-up of the space. And this is a video. Okay, so this is another exhibition that Carmen organized at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And he again created this structure where disabled visitors could come inside and experience different kinds of visual and sonic elements. At the entrance of the exhibition, he provided a wheelchair, a cane, the red string, and these earpieces, noise-canceling headphones, so that visitors could be encouraged to actually use those tools in order to experience the exhibition. This is an exhibition designed by Finnegan Shannon. You can see that they have their benches in the space. They also have these mats, so you visitors could lie on the floor. They're very happy with the grey carpet because it makes it more comfortable for visitors. And they've utilized the wall for different kinds of headings and subtitles and so on. And here again are the different kinds of seating elements. So Finnegan has really thought about how to design an exhibition where disabled people are given the highest priority. So comfortable seating, carpet on the floor, yoga mats, cushions, etc. This is an exhibition that Finnegan designed where people could come and sit on a bench, and instead of having to go walking and look at the work of art, instead you sit here and you can rotate. These are rotating tables, or lazy Susans as they call them, and you can pick up the objects and touch them. So it's also a very tactile friendly exhibition. And this sign says, welcome to this seating-centric space. So seating is a priority. And here you can see visitors interacting with the artwork. This is a work by Park MacArthur, and Park decided to create a series of ramps. Most of them are simply, pieces of wood that have been found in the trash, and different organizations used these in order to create ramps for Park to get in and out of the building. And Park is a wheelchair user. So Park decided to collect all of the ramps and put them in an exhibition as a way to remind people that these ramps are a sign of the way that the built environment is not very easy for disabled people to move and to get in and out of buildings. In this installation, I asked Kamakupalia to create a sound installation, and the speakers that you see on the walls have been installed at different heights so that visitors can, of all shapes and sizes, can put their ear to the speaker and become more intimately engaged with the work because it meets their scale. This is a really famous historical image by an artist named Frederick Keisler. Frederick Keisler was also similar to Herbert Bayer in that he was an exhibition designer, he was a graphic designer, and he was very interested in how when people come to see exhibitions, how can we make adjustments to their experience of viewing the work. And so what you're looking at here are freestanding, they're kind of these freestanding frames, freestanding walls, and when you're able to go up to these, you can adjust the settings on them so that the artwork can come up or down according to your ideal viewing position. And so I'm very inspired and excited by this creation that Keisler created. And this was back in the 1920s, 1925, in Paris. And I often wonder why our museums and galleries are not able to offer this kind of invention for the museum today, where visitors have a choice and can adjust the height and scale of the work that makes them feel the most comfortable. There are other contemporary exhibition designers today that are trying to consider the needs of visitors in this way. This is an installation of an exhibition that occurred in Ireland, and the curator had designed these sort of small little like cubbies or little mini houses that visitors could come and sit and put on headphones and become closer and more intimately engaged with the artwork in each of these sections. And I think this is a much more successful exhibition design than one where we must walk through an exhibition and only experience the art at one height. So 10 years ago, I curated an exhibition where all the artwork was hung on the wall at a much lower height. And I think that this was successful, but at the same time, it doesn't meet everyone's needs. So I encourage us to think of different, more experimental and innovative ways to hang work on the walls that would meet the needs of a variety of visitors, similar to what Frederick Keisler has done. This is an exhibition that I organized in San Diego, where in this video installation, the artist got out of her wheelchair and crawled on the grounds through the streets of London. Because of the nature of the content in the video, I actually had the gallery put this flat screen television on the floor, as I wanted to make it more difficult for visitors to see the work, but I also wanted to mirror what was being seen on the screen. But the artist was on the floor, and so therefore the flat screen is also on the floor. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your question.
네, 카시아 교수님 감사합니다. 오늘 또 흥미로운 발표를 해주신 카시아 교수님께 감사드립니다. 상당히 많은 작품들을 소개해 주셨는데요. 그게 다 좀 제대로 전달이 되셨는지 잘 모르겠습니다. 저희가 이제부터 시간 동안에는 우리 카시아 교수님이 얘기하여 주셨던 작품, 그리고 어떤 큐레이션의 방향과 관련된 저희 질문과 토론 시간을 지금부터 갖도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 제가 한두 가지 질문을 먼저 좀 드리고 말씀을 듣는 사이에 여기 계신 분들도 관련된 질문이 있으시면 자유롭게 얘기를 해주시면 좋겠습니다. 제가 처음 드리고 싶은 질문은 우리 장애예술의 주체라고 하는 문제인데요. 지금 보여주신 작품들 속에서는 장애를 가진 예술가, 예를 들면 크리스틴 썬김처럼 청각장애인을 가진 예술가라든지 카르멘 파팔리안처럼 시각장애를 가진 예술가들이 직접 제작하거나 기획해서 만든 작품들도 소개시켜 주셨고요. 또 한편으로는 뒷부분에서 보여주신 것처럼 이 외소증을 구성하기, 이 전시에서처럼 큐레이터가 어떤 장애를 가진 관람자를 위해서 전시를 기획하는 방식에 대해서도 소개를 해 주셨습니다. 그러니까 기본적으로는 우리가 장애예술이라고 했을 때 이제 두 주체가 있는 거죠. 관람자로서의 장애인과 그러니까 예술가로서의 장애인이 있는데, 이런 모든 요소들을, 모든 전시 작품들을 이제 장애예술이라고 하는 범주로 이제 포함하고자 했을 때 제기될 수 있는 이슈 중에 하나가 그렇다면 장애예술의 주체가 누가 되어야 하는가라고 하는 질문일 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 그 부분에 대해서 카시아 교수님께서 어떻게 생각하시는지 하나가 제 첫 번째 질문이고요.
Okay, yes. I I think it would be the disabled artists who have the agency in the museum, and they have agency to provide a more socially just and equal experience for disabled visitors. So by the artists providing the agency or having the agency, they're providing agency to the visitors in turn.
예. 네, 제가 두 번째 질문도 드리려고 했는데 먼저 답변 주셔서. 네, 제 두 번째 질문은 우리 카시아 교수님께서도 큐레이터로서도 또 이렇게 많은 전시를 기획을 해주셨습니다. 지금 보여주신 많은 전시 작품들 중에서도 큐레이터의 역할이 상당히 중요하게 작동할 수 있는 영역이 되게 많이 있는데요. 그러니까 이런 방식의 예술, 우리는 지금까지 주로는 일반적인 전시에 어떻게 장애인 관람자가 접근성을 높일 것인가의 차원에서 주로 고민을 많이 해왔었던 것 같습니다. 아직까지 국내에서는 아까 보여주신 이 스미소니안의 이 프로그램처럼 사실 그것마저도 아직 그렇게 충분히 마련되어 있지는 않은데, 근데 오늘 카시아 교수님께서 말씀해 주신 것은 그것보다 좀 더 포커싱이 어떻게 이제 그 작품 자체 속에 이 아까 말씀드렸던 장애인 예술가라든지 이런 경험, 일반인들이 하기 어려운 새로운 감각적인 신체적 경험을 제공할 수 있는 작품 자체를 제작할 것인가, 혹은 어떻게 관람자가 일반적인 관람 방식과는 다른 방식의 신체적 경험을 통해서 작품을 관람하게 할 것인가 라고 하는 것이 소개해 주신 작품들에서 되게 중요한 요소였다고 생각합니다. 근데 그런 전시를 기획하려고 했었을 때 큐레이터가 어떤 일을 할 수 있을까 라고 하는 것이 제 질문입니다. 큐레이터가 그런 전시를 기획하고자 하려면, 그런 전시와 그런 전시를 만들어내려고 하려면 어떤 역량과 능력을 가지고 있어야 할지가 궁금해졌습니다.
Yeah, I think it's important to have all of the different elements. Audio description, tactility, captioning, to try and integrate as many of those components as possible. It's challenging to try and meet the needs of all the disabled visitors, but I think if you invite disabled artists into the museum and gallery space and commission them and contract them as leaders and to help develop policy for the museum, that you can really trust that there's going to be a greater degree of access and agency for the disabled audiences and the public at large.
네. 예, 이제 플로우 질문도 받아보도록 하겠습니다. 혹시 오늘 강연과 오늘 강연하신 주제에 관련돼서 질문이 있으시면은 손을 들고 질문해 주시면 카시아 교수님께서 답변해 주시겠습니다. 네. 저 마이크 좀.
네, 저는 되게 단순한 질문인데요. 오늘 장애 미학에서 굉장히 중요한 위치에 계시는 아만다 카시아 선생님은 되게 쉽게 풀어서 설명해줬는데, 네, 되게 한꺼번에 다 이해를 했는지 잘 모르겠어요. 근데 이제 중간에 말씀하시는 중에 에이전시라는 말을 되게 많이 쓰시더라고요. 근데 예를 들면 이제 접근성 할 때도 agency of access 예를 들면 그냥 accessibility 이렇게 하지 않고 계속 agency라는 말을 많이 쓰는데 그것이 가지는 어떤 중요성이 있는지 좀 직접 물어보고 싶습니다.
Yeah, it's the idea that access has a lot of power. Normally, we don't think of access in very positive terms. We might think of access as compliance. But in this context, I'm arguing that actually it's the disabled artists that give power to access. They make access more powerful because it means that you're giving more just experience for the gallery visitor. You're giving a more just and equal experience for the disabled artist. And it's the artists that really show that with access we can be creative and create a more equitable museum and hopefully a more equitable world as well.
어떻게 답변이 되셨는지 있습니다. 네.
저는 온라인 공간에서의 전시의 접근성에 대해서 여쭤보고 싶습니다. 지금 말씀 주신 5가지 방법에 예를 들어서 온라인상으로 전시가 옮겨갔을 때는 제한적인 부분이 있을 것 같고요. 또 두 번째 질문은 기술의 역할에 대해서 궁금합니다. 접근성을 높이기 위해 어떤 기술이 활용되고 있는지 혹시 아시다면 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me answer the second question first. There's a fantastic gallery space in Toronto, in Canada, that I recommend that everyone look at. The name of the gallery is Tangle, and they are doing, I think, some of the best experimentation of thinking about technology and access in the world. And so what they invented was this idea of putting an iPad in the center of the gallery, and then if visitors from all over the world wanted to experience the exhibition that is a physical exhibition, you would make an appointment and then they would take you on a tour virtually with the iPad. And they would also hire an interpreter, a sign language interpreter, if you're somebody who needs that, and then you could enjoy the tour of the exhibition from anywhere in the world. So I really think that, that kind of technology is important in terms of making a physical exhibition more available to people, in real time. Online exhibitions are very challenging, but I think they're also really important, and that there has to be a way of meeting the physical world and the virtual world so that exhibitions are made available in both formats. I think that if you hire a disabled website designer, you're able to offer exhibitions that meet the needs of various disabled people in terms of screen shares, in terms of changing the fonts and adjusting the lighting and changing the scale of what you're seeing on the screen. So that's important. I think being able to ensure that you're recording all kinds of audio descriptions and making captions available online, I think that's all very within reach and possible to achieve. I think the hardest part about online exhibitions is the tactile element, but I do know some museums that they develop programs or exhibitions of tactile work, and if the visitor is unable to experience that through the computer in the virtual world, what they'll do is actually send a physical sample of material or food in the mail, and so the person would get that at their address and receive that in lieu of not being able to actually touch it or engage with it in person. So I think we have to be very inventive and very, experimental in thinking about multiple ways that visitors can access work in the virtual realm.
온라인 전시도 많이 시도됐고 특히 코로나 기간에 했었지만 우리 모두가 경험해본 바대로 그것이 갖는 또 한계들도 있었잖아요. 특히 말씀하셨던 이런 작품들과 관련해서 온라인 전시가 시도해볼 만한데 그를 위해서 우리가 되게 많이 인벤티브하고 뭔가 실험적이어야 하겠다라고 말씀해 주셨습니다. 네. 혹시 또 다른 질문? 네.
마이크를 해서 이렇게 지금 많은 분들을 위해서 배려 불교환경이라든지 준비를 하는데 그곳에 그걸 이용하는 그것을 아주 좋아하는 또 이걸 하기 때문에 오는 사람은 얼마나 됩니까? 이용자.
Oh, I think it really varies based on the location of the gallery. But I'm not sure of the numbers actually. I think it really, as I said, it depends. Most of the time when I'm organizing exhibitions, they are in galleries that are based at universities. So a lot of the audience that I get are students that are coming in to see the exhibition. And just going back to that earlier point that there are limitations to online exhibition experiences, and we understand that through the pandemic, but I think it's very important for us to begin to really become experts and develop expertise in curating and designing online exhibitions and making our physical galleries available online in much more sophisticated ways, because we increase our audiences and we increase access for disabled people. Some disabled people are unable to come physically into a gallery, so it's important that we develop expertise through, curators that might specialize in that area of online, curating online exhibitions. I think as art historians and educators, we must train our students in how to become more sophisticated and develop ways to make our exhibitions more accessible online. I really believe that that is the future, where technology will hopefully help enhance that experience for the audience even more.
우리 작가는 제가 여쭤보고 싶은 것은 이 배려풀이 환경이라든지 모든 걸 잘 만들어 놨다는 거죠. 작업할 수 있는 것도. 그런데 그걸 실제 이용하는 사람들이, 보는 사람, 또 이런 분들이, 많은 분은 미술관에 가길 원해요. 근데 그분이 못 가니까 휠체어 가기 어려우니까 인터넷 이런 사이버상으로도 가는데, 실제 그 미술관에 가서 그분들의 작품을 듣고, 아까 여기 큐레이터 얘기를 직접 듣는 걸 원한단 말입니다. 많은 분은. 그런데 그런 환경을 만들어 놨을 때 과연 얼마나 가느냐. 내가 가보고 싶어서 했는데 그거 단순히 사이버상으로 그 작품을 보려고 하는 게 아니고 그 미술관에 가서 그거를 보고 싶은 거죠. 그랬을 때 그런 참여도가 얼마나 되느냐. 우리 전 미술관을 가끔 가는데 보면 참 준비가 잘 돼 있어요. 숙제 역습도 잘 돼 있는데 실제로 우리 여기 오늘 모두 오시면 알겠지만 굉장히 친절하고 잘 준비가 돼 있는데 실제 없다는 거죠. 그랬을 때 그런 게 이제 잘 준비했을 때 그쪽에서는 이쪽보다는 나으니까 많이 나왔다고 보니까 그쪽은 참여도가 그 실제 수요자가 얼마나 그거를 이용하느냐 이걸 여쭤보고 싶은 거예요.
통역 되신 거죠? 네. 제가
Yes, but I missed the last part of your question. Can you repeat it?
제가 다시 한번 정리를 해보자면 질문하신 분이 질문하신 거는 그러니까 뭐 한국에도 그렇고 이런 액세서빌리티는 갖춰져 있는데 실질적으로 그런 제 장애인 관람자들이 얼마나 많은 관람자들이 실제로 미술 작품을 관람하느냐. 그러니까 특히 이제 아만다 카시아 교수님이 계시는 그쪽 지역에서 미국이나 카나다 지역에서 이걸 알고 싶으시다라고 하시는 거죠? 네.
Oh, I see. Yes, I think quite a lot. I think a majority of audience coming through are disabled because they understand that it's an exhibition about disability. They understand that there are disabled services that are being offered. They understand that it's a celebration of disability, and they're very supportive. So I think that it's a success for that reason.
통계적인 수치 같은 거는 아니신데 그래도 상당히 많은 분들이 이제 관심을 갖고 참가를 하시는 것 같습니다. 네. 마이크 좀 전달해 주세요.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 국립미술관에 근무하고 있는 큐레이터인데요. 아무래도 국가기관이나 공공기관에서 이제 미술 전시를 하게 되면 전시 내용보다는 사실은 부차적인 어떤 교육 프로그램이라든지 아니면 시설적인 면에서 그런 접근성을 중요하게 이제 여기는 경우들이 많은데 오늘 굉장히 저도 특별하게 여겼던 점은 또 저도 이제 관심 있는 분야이기는 한데 주제 자체가 이제 어떤 장애의 몸과 그 몸이 경험하는 것들을 이제 주제로 이끌어내서 실질적으로 그 안에서 무슨 이야기를 할 수 있는지를 제도 비평의 관점에서 바라봤던 것이 사실은 저는 굉장히 흥미롭다고 생각을 했어요. 그런데 이제 두 가지 고민이 있는 것 같아요. 하나는 이제 당사자성의 문제일 것 같거든요. 그러니까 작가분들이 어떤 그런 당사자성을 가지고 작품 활동을 하시는 경우도 있지만 또 그냥 그 주제 자체에 작가가 관심이 있어서 하는 경우 그리고 사실은 기획자 자체도 사실은 이제 당사자성이 이해하려고 노력하는 이제 그런 과정 속에 있는 좀 복잡한 관계망 속에서 이런 전시들이 이루어지는 것 같거든요. 거기서 누구의 목소리를 어떻게 전달하느냐, 거기서 당사자성을 어떻게 찾느냐가 전시에서 어떻게 구현되는지가 첫 번째로는 궁금하고 두 번째는 이제 이런 기획 전시를 통해서 이런 주제를 다루는 전시를 하시는데 사실은 이제 저는 기관 소속에 있는 기획자로서 이게 약간 단편적으로 끝나면 안 된다고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 최악의 경우는 이게 이제 대상화되는 게 제일 최악의 경우라고 생각을 하는데 이렇게 이런 전시를 통해서 어떤 awareness 그러니까 사람들이 좀 더 이런 문제에 대해서 자각을 할 수 있게 만든 이후에 이런 여러 가지 프로그램이나 장치들이 미술관에 실제로 좀 더 장기적으로 실용화된 케이스들이 있으신지 이런 것들이 궁금합니다.
Oh, I don't know about real life, but I do know that, for example, the artist that creates the benches, for more benches in the museum, that oftentimes when she gives the benches, includes the benches in an exhibition, the museum will then buy those benches and start actually using them for museums. So they recognize that, it's a critique of the institution and a critique of the lack of benches, so therefore they buy them and they place them around the museum permanently, so that visitors can engage in a very practical way with more benches. So that's just one example of how it's not just merely an objectification or a one-off, that museums recognize that they have to start implementing these exhibition designs and these critiques by disabled artists in a more permanent way. And of course, the hope is that this will infiltrate through all museums eventually over time. But it will take a long time for museums to transform and to change their cultures.
그 첫 번째 질문, 당사자성에 대한 질문은 대답을 안 하신 것 같아요.
I didn't hear the last part. Can you say that again?
첫 번째 질문 한 번만 요약해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
예, 제가 이해한 바로는 제가 아까 처음에 드렸던 이제 장애예술 주체하고 한 문제하고도 관련이 되어 있는 것 같은데요. 미술관이나 큐레이터가 장애예술과 관련된 주제의 전시를 기획하고 전시를 만들고자 했었을 때 제기되는 어떤 중요한 이슈 중에 하나가 이 당사자성인 거죠. 이 작업에 참여하는 당사자가 누구인가, 혹은 이게 어떤 장애인을 대상화시키지는 않을까, 그러지 않는 방법은 무엇인가 라고 하는 여러 가지 질문들이 제기되는데, 특히 이 문제에 대한 어떤 중요한 질문을 해주셨습니다. 그래서 당사자성을 어떻게 볼 것인가 질문이었습니다.
I think I heard some of it. So you're saying that the most important part of this is the agency question?
Whenever they plan to have the art exhibition at the museum, they are concerned very much with
Yes. I think the answer is yes. That the agency must be given to the disabled artists to help lead and design spaces in our museum that benefit disabled audiences, because disabled artists are the ones that have the most intimate knowledge and understanding of the needs of our audiences.
아무래도 이 장애예술이라고 하는 문제가 사회문화적인 어떤 차이들, 그리고 한국과 지금 카시아님이 활동하시는 미나 카나다에서의 많은 좀 차이점이 분명히 있는 것 같습니다. 그러니까 당사자성이라고 하는 문제와 관련해서도 그런 것 같은데요. 그 점에서 보자면 한국에서는 아직 정말 좀 많은 토대가 만들어져야 되는 단계가 아닌가 하는 생각을 해봅니다. 혹시 또 질문 있으신 분? 네.
사실 지금 발표해 주신 내용을 통해 소개해 주신 5가지 방법이랑 그에 따른 여러 가지 예시들을 보았을 때 사실 모든 장애를 고려한 것이다 보기에는 좀 어떤 특정한 장애를 고려한 전시라는 생각이 좀 많이 들었습니다. 근데 개인적이지만 저는 접근성에는 정답이 없다고 느끼고, 또 접근성이 여러 가지 시도들이 좀 필요하고, 또 그런 다채로운 시도들이 얼마든지 환영받고 그 안에서 좀 많은 피드백이 생겨야 이제 이런 접근성에 대한 논의들이 계속 다양해질 수 있다고 생각을 하는데요. 근데 이제 접근성에 대한 관심이 한국에서 계속 높아지다 보니까 시각예술 분야에서도 많은 분들이 접근성을 높이려는 시도들을 많이 하고 있는데 이때 마치 모든 장애를 고려하지 않은 접근성을 제공하는 경우 그건 정답이 아니라는 식의 얘기들을 좀 하시는 것 같아요. 마치 약간 발달장애인을 위해서 내 작품을 조금 더 쉽게 풀어야 되겠다라고 해서 발달장애인을 위해서 이렇게 만들어서 어떤 것들을 준비를 했을 때 왜 시각장애인은 고려하지 않으셨죠? 왜 청각장애인을 위한 것은 없나요? 라는 이제 그런 피드백을 받을 때 굉장히 당황스러운 경우들이 좀 생기는 것 같더라고요. 그래서 여쭤보고 싶었던 거는 모든 장애를 고려한 최대한의 많은 접근성을 다 포함한 전시를 지향해야 하는 것인지 아니면 작품에 따라 또 전시의 특성에 따라 가장 이상적인 접근성을 선택해서 제공하는 방향도 괜찮은 것인지 그런 의견을 좀 듣고 싶었고 혹시 진짜 모든 장애를 고려해서 하는 성공적이라는 표현이 좀 그렇지만 그런 사례가 있었는지 좀 여쭤보고 싶었습니다.
Yeah, I've not very often organized exhibitions with developmentally disabled artists. I'm not sure of the situation in South Korea, but here in the US, they have different types of organizations that cater to the interests of developmentally disabled artists, and those artists work together and create art. And then the mainstream museums come and curate exhibitions of that work. It's also kind of a problematic art historical genre that we call outsider art for developmentally disabled artists. And it's kind of considered, at least for me, a whole separate area or a separate field of study and research that I haven't yet explored. The reason that I spend more time with physical disabilities is because I myself am somebody that has autism and physical disability. So that has been the area that has been of the most interest for me up until this point. There's only been one or two occasions where I've integrated developmental disabilities in my curating. And in that time, I was very interested in how to incorporate developmentally disabled artwork and also to incorporate their way of being, their way of expressing that might be very different to somebody that has vision or that somebody that is audible and can use, speech and language to express themselves. So I do find that to be a harder category. And there's much more left to explore and to experiment with.
그 문제는 말씀하셨던 질문은 상당히 중요하고도 중요한 질문인데 실제로 모든 장애의 경우를 다 고려한 액세서빌리티라고 하는 것을 실질적으로 구현하는 건 쉽지는 않은 문제인 것 같습니다. 그래서 그런 말씀하셨고 또 질문 있으실까요? 로우에서 아직 저희 시간 많이 있습니다. 예.
장애인 예술가들이랑 이제 조금 얘기를 해보거나 하면 그 비장애인 예술가들에 비해서 어떤 작품 수준이 떨어질까봐 걱정한다던가 그런 거에 대한 우려를 되게 많이 하는 걸 봤어요. 근데 그런 장애인 예술에 대한 어떤 퀄리티 측면에서 어떻게 물론 인식을 개선하는 게 훨씬 중요하겠지만 이게 예술 교육하고도 관련이 된다고 생각을 하거든요. 근데 한국에서는 아직도 장애인 예술가들에 대한 어떤 교육에 대한 접근성이 좀 많이 제한적이라고 생각이 되는데 이제 교수님이 계시는 학교나 미국에서는 어떤 방식으로 장애인 예술 교육에 이제 이루어지고 있는지 궁금합니다.
Well, I mean, that's really just a big attitude shift that I think would be really difficult to try and overcome. Is there actually disability studies field of research in the universities in South Korea? That's a question I have for the moderator.
한국에서 스타디가
선임된 대학이 있냐 이런 질문을 주셨는데 제가 알기로는 없는 거로 알고 있습니다. 혹시 있나요? 없죠. 네, 있습니다.
Sure, yeah, I think disability studies as a field of research really helps support people's attitudinal shifts, although that's only within a certain setting, so which is academic, of course. So I think that it's just going to take time to shift the language and transform the culture so that people don't assume that the work is somehow less than and instead consider it as equivalent to and generative, that is providing us with new information about ourselves, our bodies, our senses, that, you know, is just as important and valid. I think that's going to be a really hard to overcome that bias and discrimination that we have in society.
네, 그러니까 우리가 이 문제를 고민하면 할수록 지금 현재 저희의 상황이 얼마나 많은 것이 해야 될 일들이 참 많은가를 더 깨닫게 되는데요, 점점. 네, 이제 장애학에 관련돼서는 최근 들어서 몇몇 이제 책들이 나오고 있는 이런 정도고 아직 이제 미국이나 카나다처럼 대학이나 이런 데서 본격적인 연구들이 진행되는 이런 상황은 아니라서 또 그 문제가 이 장애예술 전반과 밀접하게 관련되어 있는 것 같습니다. 네. 또 질문 있으실까요? 네. 아까
네, 흥미로운 발제와 앞에서도 질문을 좋은 질문을 많이 해주셔서 많이 배우는 시간이었고요. 저는 방금 전에 있었던 장애학 관련해서 사회복지에서 그냥 거시적으로 보지 않았나라는 생각이 듭니다. 저는 예술경영과 문화정책을 연구하는 사람이고요. 그래서 제 질문은 좀 거시적인 질문이 되기도 합니다. 그래서 얘기를 해주셨었던 부분을 좀 정리를 해서 생각을 해보면 장애예술이라는 것이 향유자의 중심에서 그리고 창작자의 중심에서 그리고 목적 중심에서 이루어지고 있다는 것을 좀 알 수 있었는데요. 그 중에서 제가 궁금한 것은 그 목적 중심으로 움직여졌을 때 소셜 체인지라든지 그런 사회운동 측면 그리고 예술 분야 또는 예술 표현의 다양성 측면에 대해서 이제 사례를 통해서 얘기를 해주셨는데요. 그 외에 다른 목적성이 또 있을지 궁금해서 여쭤봅니다. 감사합니다.
I didn't hear the question. Can you say it again?
제가
이해하기로는 이 장애예술이 지향하는 바가 결국 무엇일까라고 하는 질문과 관련될 것 같은데요. 그러니까 이 사회적인 변화를 지향하려고 하는 것인지 장애예술의 목적이라는 질문. 이런 질문이셨던가요? 아닌가요? 그럼 다시 한 번만 들어주세요.
네, 질문을 다시 한번 반복을 하면 그 목적 중심에 있어서 소셜 체인지가 하나가 있었고 말씀해 주신 것 중에서 그리고 예술 분야나 예술 표현의 다양성이라는 분야가 또 하나 있었는데 그 외에 다른 목적성을 가질 수 있는 게 있는지 또는 그런 작업을 하신 것이 있는지 궁금해서 장애예술의 카테고리에서의 나타날 수 있는 여러 목적 중에 이 두 가지 외에 또 다른 것이 있는지 여쭤보았습니다.
Well, I think it's important, to help challenge perceptions, as we've already said, and to transform museum culture. But I think it's also to show how we really do neglect the other senses that we have, that we really overly rely on vision, and that we should try and incorporate other types of senses into our museum experience. So, there's lots of messages that the art is trying to tell us. It's trying to give us a critique of the barriers that are in the environment for disabled people and in the museum as well. But it's also saying here's a different way of communicating that we should really explore and investigate more deeply, because there's a lot of generative, very productive ways that we can communicate that we can all really learn from.
네, 좀 일반적인 대답을 해주신 것 같은데요. 네. 예, 또 질문 있으실까요? 네, 계신 분들이 질문이 상당히 좋고 중요한 질문들을 해주셔서 우리가 이 이슈에 대해서 좀 더 깊이 알 수 있게 되는 것 같습니다. 혹시 저희가 10분 정도 남아 있습니다.
네, 제가 잘 상상하지 못했거나 접한 적 없던 흥미로운 레퍼런스를 되게 많이 알려주셔서 너무 유익한 시간이었다고 생각을 하고요. 굉장히 좀 편협한 질문이 될 것 같아서 굉장히 조심스러워지는데 굉장히 좁고 얕은 저의 경험에 의거했을 때는 상대적으로 오늘 소개해 주신 것처럼 굉장히 좋은 작업들을 시도하는 여러 작가 혹은 단체 혹은 기관들도 많지만 전체 씬에서 차지하는 비율이라는 측면으로 보았을 때 적어도 저 개인에게는 시각예술 분야에서 이 접근성에 대한 고민과 시도 혹은 성취들이 공연예술계에 비해서 조금은 미진하다고 감각되는데요. 사실은 공연예술계 역시도 이 부분에 대해서 본격적으로 목소리가 높아지고 어떤 시도들이 가시화된지는 그리 오래되지 않았고 여전히 미진한 영역이 많다고 느껴집니다만 간간히 접하게 되는 어떤 시각예술계의 어떤 여러 가지 시도나 행사나 다양한 면면들을 접했을 때 왜 매번 이제 접근성에 대한 것들이 공연예술계만큼의 치열함을 관찰하기가 어려울까라는 고민이 조금 있습니다. 그래서 이러한 시각예술계의 태도라고 할까요? 흐름이라고 할까요? 이것의 원인이 물론 하나만 꼽기 어려운 굉장히 복합적인 문제이지만 가장 주요한 원인을 몇 가지 꼽아본다고 하면 무엇이라고 생각을 하시는지, 그리고 이러한 판도를 바꾸기 위해서 마찬가지로 복합적이고 어려운 문제지만 최우선시 되어야 하는 요소는 무엇일지에 대한 교수님의 의견이 궁금합니다.
Okay, I'm trying to understand the question. So you're saying that what are the aspects that we need to improve on in order to have a greater representation of disability art in our museum? Is that the question? Okay, I'm still not sure I understand the question, but I think that, if we're to say that, how do we make disability art, how do we compare that to performance art? I think it's interesting because actually a lot of disability art is performance-based, and there are challenges in terms of if there is a live performance, for instance, how do we make that more accessible? Well, you can do that by recording it, by captioning it, by providing image description, by providing translation. I think that this work of disability art is very complex because there has to be so many layers of translation, and that was, the first topic that I addressed in my talk today was translation. So we have to be able to think about different ways of offering the mediums, including performance, in the museum space that is truly accessible. So again, I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I tried.
네, 일단 그 한국에서의 그 상황에 전제를 하고 계신 것 같고, 한국에서의 관찰에 의해서 공연예술계가 접근성 문제에 접근하는 것과 이제 시각예술계에서 접근성을 비교해서 말씀하셨는데, 그 맥락이 좀 잘 이해하기는 쉽지 않으셨었던 것 같습니다. 근데 아마 장르적인 특성도 좀 작동하고 있지 않을까 싶습니다. 공연예술은 아무래도 현장에 가서 보아야 하는 것이 가장 더 시각예술보다는 훨씬 더 이제 첫 번째 그로 되어지고 있으니까 관련되어 있지 않을까 하는 생각을 해봅니다. 네. 우리 마지막 질문 하나 받을 수 있을 것 같습니다.
우선 제가 좀 늦게 와서 처음부터 다 듣지 못한 것이 너무너무 아쉽지만 뒤에 들어서 너무 재미있게 잘 들었고요. 접근성에 관한 여러 제도적인 접근, 그리고 창작자들의 접근성에 대한 미학을 또 풀어나감에 있어서 당사자들의 평가가 절대적으로 필요하다라는 생각이 많이 드는데요. 당사자들, 이 장애라는 것이 굉장히 개인적인 경험이기도 하고, 혹은 더 구시적으로 이제 국가 제도나 복지 차원에서의 영역이기도 하다 보니 정말 다양한 평가들이나 개선점들을 제시할 수 있을 것 같고, 그에 대해서 창작자나 혹은 이 큐레이터나 다양한 이 이해관계자분들이 좀 두려워하는 부분들이 있을 것 같아요. 이전에 이제 다양한 경험들을 통해서 어떻게 피드백을 받아보셨는지 방식적인 부분들이 좀 궁금하고, 그것들을 또 어떻게 수용해야 돼야 되는지에 대한 자세나 이런 것들, 경험들을 공유해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
Which stakeholders did you have in mind?
네. 그 예술가 분들이나 크리에이터 분들 모두에게 가져야 하는 자세들을 좀 여쭤보는 거였어요. 그리고 그
Yeah, I
피드백들을
think that
해결하는
they, you know, in the last 10 years since I've been doing this work, attitudes have really shifted greatly. Here in the US, I've never seen so many disabled artists before. 10 years ago, there was nothing. And now it's really, blown up. It's become really exciting. Lots of energy amongst the younger generation of artists. So in terms of stakeholders, artists are becoming more powerful. Museums and gallery directors are becoming more aware of the need to integrate disabled audiences. There's been a real shift in that sense. And there's more and more scholarship and writing that's being published in this area, more events. I think that it's taking a long time, especially for museums, to begin incorporating this work. But audiences are becoming more aware. And I think the reason for that is because disability is one minority identity amongst others. So the other minorities, where we're thinking about gender, race, sexuality, all of those have become more important identities to address in the museum. And I think museum and gallery directors and audiences are all recognizing the need for disability to be more meaningfully represented in the museum.
네, 그 마지막 질문은 아까 또 나왔었던 당사자성 질문하고도 연결이 되어 있는 것 같은데요. 그러니까 장애뿐만이 아니라 말씀해 주셨지만 젠더나 인종이나 다양한 우리 사회의 마이너리티의 문제와도 관련되어 있는 거고, 그게 사회 제도나 그 기관이나 복지나 법적 차원이나 이런 차원에서 어떻게 대별되고 있는가 하는, 좀 어떻게 보면 전반적인 이 사회 구조와 문화의 문제와 관련되어 있을 것 같습니다. 네, 오늘 지금까지 질문을 많은 분들이 질문해 주시고 오랜 시간 동안 답변을 해 주셨던 아만다 카시아 교수님께 이제 다시 한번 박수로 감사의 말씀을 드리겠고요. 아만다 카시아 교수님, 마지막으로 여기 계신 분들에게 해주고 싶으신 말씀 있으시면 마지막 인사 부탁드립니다.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much for having me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
네, 감사합니다. 네.
Okay, good night. Bye bye.
네, 밤인 모양이네요. 네. 오늘 여러 가지 더블 통역의 과정 속에서 이런 행사를 진행하다 보니까 여러 가지 제가 미숙한 점이 많았습니다. 그래도 이제 많은 분들이 좋은 질문들을 해주셔서 오늘 논의가 그래도 좀 풍성하게 이루어진 것 같고요. 아만다 교수님도 말씀하셨지만 내일은 같은 시간에 아만다 교수님께서 접근성을 미학적으로 전유하기 실제 사례를 중심으로 라고 하는 라운드 테이블을 진행하신다고 합니다. 그러니까 오늘 소개해 주셨던 작품들과 그와 관련 이슈들을 좀 더 구체적으로 질문하고 아실 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 그 프로그램에도 많은 참여, 관심 부탁드립니다. 네, 오늘 저희 행사는 여기서 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.